We are the people. That's who we are. That's who we are. Okay.
Thank you, Paulina. And now let's talk about August 9, 2014.
Well, what happened in August 9, 2014?
Well, you see, Paulina, conflict arose in Ferguson, Missouri.
You bet it did.
We have gathered that Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, was shot and killed by Darren Wilson, a white police officer.
It was said Michael and his friend Dorian Johnson had just left Ferguson Market and were walking in the middle of the street in Campfield Drive when Officer Daring arrived in his vehicle alone, and he told the two men to move to the sidewalk. Seeing as Mr. Brown fit the description of a suspect in a convenience store theft.
He positioned his car to block the two men as well as the traffic. After an altercation between the officer and Mr. Brown, the officer fires two shots, running from inside the vehicle, one missing him and another grazing his thumb. Mr. Brown started running, the officer chasing after him on foot.
Then he stops, turns to the officer, moves toward him, and the officer fires several shots at him, fatally wounding him.
Some witnesses said Mr. Brown punched Officer Wilson while Mr. Brown was partly inside the vehicle. At least one witness said no part of Mr. Brown was over inside the vehicle. In his own testimony, Officer Wilson said that Mr. Brown reached into the vehicle and fought for his life.
Some witnesses said Mr. Brown never moved toward Officer Wilson when he was shot and killed. Others said that Mr. Brown had his hands raised in the air. Several others said that he did not raise his hands at all, or that he raised them briefly.
Now, let's go back a few 400 years.
Yes, 1619, when slavery was first introduced to America, or as I would call it, the Dark Days.
You are right about that, Paulina. No human being should be treated like that. So let's talk a little about slavery.
First of all, slavery is a condition compared to that of a slave in respect of exhausted labor or restricted freedom, and it began in America when the first of African slaves were brought to the North American colony of Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 to aid in the production of such lucrative crops as tobacco.
Slaves in the South consisted about 1/3 of the Southern population. Most slaves lived on large farms or small plantations. Slave owners sought to make their slaves completely dependent on them, and a system of restrictive codes governed life among slaves. They were prohibited from learning to read and write, and their behavior and movement was restricted. Many masters took sexual liberties with slave women and rewarded obedient slave behavior with favors. While rebellious slaves were brutally punished, a strict hierarchy among slaves helped keep them divided and less likely to organize against their masters. Slaves did marry and raise large families. Most slave owners encouraged this practice, but nonetheless did not hesitate to divide slave families by sale or removal.
Damn those plantation owners. Now it's time to make some connection.
Yes, Paulina, now that we've covered everything, let's connect the dots.
Let's start with discrimination. One thing that we can see standing out is the black being the victims in all of this by being treated unfairly.
Yes, back in 1619, people were kidnapped and sold into slavery because the white believed to be superior to black, and that there was no issue treating them as property.
Here's one thing I don't understand, Marlet. Why did they choose to do that to them? What did they do? What are the black guilty of? Did they do something wrong? Were all of them taken to court to be tried for something that claims all black people to be guilty of?
That's where discrimination comes in, Paulina. Black people are the victims of discrimination. That's where discrimination comes in, Paulina. Black people are the victims of discrimination. They are treated unjustly because they are guilty of being born with dark skin.
It's not as much as history repeating itself as history having an impact on the present.
Officer Wilson, believing it was right to shoot an unarmed black teenager, killed poor Michael Brown and got off the hook without punishing like our dear plantation owners.
What?
Slavery had such a great impact that we still see traces of it today.
I agree. Some people are still against the idea of black being equal to white in southern parts of the U.S.
Yeah. Have you seen those restaurants where only white people are allowed? It's horrible.
Well, I believe that is all for today, and this was the
PNM News.